Here I am. Now I'm on camera. Very, very excited kicking off this fall series of LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube Lives. And I'm here today to talk about the series and what we're going to have in it, to also talk a bit about what JNC Consulting has been doing lately and what we're doing this fall. And also I'm open if people have questions they want to ask and put through on the chat. Like I said, we're live on Instagram. I'm using StreamYard on LinkedIn and YouTube, so hopefully I will get the questions and comments coming through. If not, you can also just message me afterwards as well. So what I wanted to start off with today is talking a bit about why am I doing what I'm doing? Why did I found JNC Consulting, Jane Clark Consulting back in February 2021? And what's led me to this point in my career and my journey. Fundamentally, okay, I'm a huge policy nerd. For those who've seen my LinkedIn post, it's true that since the age of 8, I've wanted to be Prime Minister of Canada. Not sure that I still want that job because it does seem quite daunting. However, I've always understood the importance of politics and policy and how much of an impact it can have on your day-to-day life. Something that I think my one teenager is very tired of hearing me talk about every time we're somewhere together in the city and I see a sign or I see someone who doesn't have housing, and I immediately start into talking about why this is a policy issue and why you really could address this if you had the right policy. So I've always been very passionate about solving problems, solving the world's problems and fighting injustice. I appeared on the front page of my local newspaper when I was in 7th grade for boycotting a school trip that I thought was too expensive. And I've also had many other instances back in my slightly more tumultuous teen days where I walked out of classes because I disagreed with something a teacher was saying. In any case, my values are very, very important to me. And I think for me, one of the things that I think is really important and one of the reasons why I wanted to start doing the work that I'm doing right now is that I really firmly believe that there is so much potential out there across Canada and in the nonprofit sector for organizations to get better connected to influencing policy and setting the direction for policy. And that's the way that they can have the most sustainable impact. And I think another key part of that as well is that these organizations, in order to be successful and in order to go and deliver programs, very often to people who are furthest away from, kind of the central reach of government programs, or people who would not be appropriately reached by kind of the standard cookie cutter programs, these organizations need funding. And I really believe that in a country like Canada, we have an incredible privilege in many, many respects of our lives. And we really have, because of that, I think we have a responsibility, first of all, as a society here in Canada, to do more to help people who are living, who are not benefiting from that privilege. And so I think for me, policy is the way to get to those solutions. That's the most effective way. That's the most sustainable way. But I think it's often not always clear for civil society, nonprofit organizations, charitable organizations, to understand where they fit into those conversations, to know where to start even when it comes to talking to government. Certainly, depending on the government, depending on the issue, governments can sometimes be very keen and actually very active in terms of reaching out and asking for consultations, asking for written submissions. So that's amazing when there are those opportunities. But then how do you make sure that you're actually taking advantage of those effectively? That's one question. And another, apologies for the background noise, I have a cat who just ran into the door, I think. So there are these opportunities, and the question is, how do you take advantage of them? Or maybe there aren't a lot of opportunities, or it's not immediately obvious how you get connected to those opportunities, or which are the opportunities that you want to get connected to. So these are all the kinds of questions that I really set out to answer in the work that I'm doing. I have had the opportunity in my life to spend 9 years working as a federal civil servant. And I'm full transparency here. Those were 9 conflicted years for me. I think that civil service is an incredible calling, and people who work in it are doing very hard work under sometimes very challenging circumstances. And there are a lot of brilliant people there. But for me personally, I always felt really frustrated by the fact that I had so little influence over the impact of the work. I think the reason I say that is because I was working on, long-term policy problems. I've always been someone who's kind of impatient. And so, working on projects for 2 or 3 years, only to sometimes see them, not get approved or not move forward, or to see the political direction shift. I mean, that's part of the reality of life in policy work and life in the federal civil service. And it's a complex system. Finding the levers of change is not always easy. But I think over time, for me personally, I started to feel like I would be able to make more of an impact if I was able to get out of that environment and start helping others understand how they could be more effective in working with government and how they can really engage more effectively with government. So that's what I started doing. I went to work for a number of different nonprofit organizations. First for an organization called Dignitas, which is no longer in existence, but did incredible work specifically in Malawi and to some extent in Canada as well, although their primary focus was on Malawi, working on healthcare and specifically addressing the HIV/AIDS crisis. So I worked with them. I helped them get government funding. I helped them manage their government funding. I went on to Save the Children Canada, where I also managed a portfolio of funding, and they were growing a lot. Their funding from Global Affairs, which was then called CETA back then, or maybe DFAT-D in those days. So and then from there, I moved on to an organization called Pathways to Education, where I had the incredible opportunity of working with governments across Canada, many different provinces and nationally, to really engage government on behalf of the young people in the programs that we were working on. So all of that experience, really, really built for me, I think, a really strong sense of the possibilities that are out there. The possibilities that are out there for Canada's charitable nonprofit sector, with a little bit of guidance, a little bit of training, coaching, and empowerment, how much more of an impact that sector can have in Canada. And I focus specifically on that sector because I think it has its own very unique set of challenges and opportunities. There are other kinds of organizations that receive funding from government or that get support from the public, but my primary focus is on nonprofit organizations and charities because they're very unique in terms of the way that they set out to try and really serve a particular cause, make a particular change, help people in a particular way. But they do it often in a very entrepreneurial way, I would say. They do it without a lot of guidance necessarily. They might do it just setting off because someone has a vision or a dream, or because someone has a really close community connection and understands what their community needs and how those needs are not being met more generally. So I really think that sector, because of the work that it does, and I'm not saying it's perfect because that's not true by any means. As anyone who knows, who's worked in the sector, I think there's been, a real tendency for charities and nonprofits to have this really false kind of halo effect, I would call it, over many, many decades, where people just assume, well, you must be doing something good if you're in this kind of, do-gooder space. Well, I think that it's still quite possible to do harm in those settings as well. And I think it's also still very, very important to constantly be thinking about, why am I doing this work and what am I getting out of it myself? And how am I making sure that I'm not doing any harm, either in perpetuating racism, white supremacy, colonization, patriarchy, et cetera. Because there's certainly been a tendency, for the sector to reproduce the systems that it exists in and where it works, and to kind of continue to really reproduce a lot of those power relationships and structures and challenges. And so that's why when I launched into doing this government relations work, government relations is an interesting beast because I think that government relations typically at its heart is something that's very, very detached from the issues. It's a lot about kind of the technical how-to of working with government. It's a lot about the right way to do it, how to follow the rules, how to understand the hierarchy. And those are really important things to understand if you want to be effective in your work with government. And those are some of the things that I cover in our course that's launching again next week, our Get Ready to Grow Success in Government Funding course, which we'll be continuing to launch again over the course of the next couple of years because it's been very, very well received. And it's a chance to really dig deep into the mechanics of funding within the federal government, how that decision making is made, and how you can best position yourself to take advantage of that. But I think the thing is, I think that the traditional way that we talk about government relations in Canada, and the way that we've talked about it for a long time, has been, government relations is a tool, essentially. It's a tool, it's a tactic that can serve almost any objective. So it can serve, business objectives. It can serve any kinds of business, any kind of lobbying. It can serve, many different kinds of community interests, different kinds of belief systems. And of course, yes, that's true. It is a set of tools and tactics, largely. But from my perspective, there's a bit more to government relations than that. When I was working for different organizations, one of the things that's always been challenging for me is that I really see the power of those tactics and tools that shape government relations. And there are a lot that anyone can use and adapt and take in different directions. But I don't think that government relations per se is as completely valueless as people like to think it is. I think that there is a way in which government relations, the way that it's been done, has really continued to serve to uphold a lot of the same power structures and challenges and decision-making structures and imbalances that are already exist in Canadian society and also globally. Because if you're not actually challenging that system that we're all working within, it's very easy for the work that you're doing to just by default reinforce a lot of those power structures. And I think that's something I've been grappling a lot with over the last few years, and especially since I started working for myself and building this business, is how can we do government relations a little bit differently? What does it look like to do government relations from an explicitly values-driven perspective, where we are a feminist organization. I am an LGBTQ person, and we're LGBTQ owned and operated. Where we also have a very strong commitment to human rights and rights-based approaches, and to gender-based approaches. I guess if I'm referring specifically even to GBA plus within the federal government. But just more generally, a feminist approach as well. And what does that mean? And I would argue that it means that we don't just see government relations as something that is on its own, separate from everything else, that it's just a set of tools. But we think about the purposes to which it's being used and the way that it's being used and who is included and who is not included. I don't want to make this into sort of a big rant about the traditional GR sector, because I actually think there's a lot of amazing work being done in public affairs firms and large GR firms all across Canada with people who have incredible experience and have worked for a wide variety of different organizations and issues. I actually just wanted to shout out right now to an organization that's near and dear to my heart called the Canadian Advocacy Network. That's a group of public relations or public affairs and government relations professionals in Canada who actually offer pro bono services to charities who want to try and be more successful in their work with government. And you can access them through their website, and they'll often offer some very specific pointers and suggestions and even connections and contacts they may have. So I think that's a really incredible resource that I would want to direct everyone to. And I think also, there's a lot of great work that's being done in that sector in terms of generating learning, and there's some great programs and the courses out there. For example, Seneca's Certificate in Government Relations, or some of the programs out of Carleton these days. But I would say that that's for this specialized audience who are planning to work specifically in this area. And I would say that that's a system and a structure that inevitably. Sorry, I just lost the LinkedIn there very briefly. That's a sector that works very much within existing spaces and existing ways, structures, and ways of working. And you know what? I'm very pragmatic. And that's probably why I've actually loved doing this work so much, is because I really do believe that sometimes you have to use, the existing structures that are there, obviously, and work well within them in order to have a more powerful long-term impact. And so that I think is really worthwhile. However, I also think that there's room for new and fresh voices to come in and really challenge the way that things have always been done, and to really challenge, the traditional way of kind of completely separating government relations tactics and tools from the issues. And that's why, for me, I've always had this conflict in terms of my career, in terms of the kind of work that I've done, where I am someone who, as I mentioned previously, I have strong values. I've always really believed heavily in fighting injustice. And I've also figured out that how to work within the mechanisms of government. And sometimes, the most effective way to do that is to come at issues from a nonpartisan perspective, to come at issues from a perspective where you welcome, a wide variety of perspectives, a wide variety of views, a wide variety of approaches, so that you can bring people to the table and have a dialogue. And I think that's something that's continually relevant in this increasingly polarized age that we find ourselves in Canadian politics as well, both federally and provincially. So I really do believe in kind of my fundamental philosophy of how I approach government relations. And if this is something that you're interested in learning more about, you can join our course, which is the strategic empathy approach. And that's really about understanding and trying to put yourself into the shoes of the person that you're working with, that you're communicating with, and really trying to develop a detailed and nuanced understanding of what motivates them, what challenges they face in their work, and how they can how you can help them be more successful, and how you can find alignment between the change you're trying to create and their own priorities. And that's why you can really make, I think, very effective incremental change. Some people might argue that that's not the way to go, that I'm too pragmatic and I'm too incremental. But for me, in terms of having worked in the public sector as a civil servant for many years, and knowing the lay of the land and the way that it is now as well, that's still, to my mind, the best approach when you're engaging with government for that kind of change. But it's not to say that there are other kinds of advocacy that are also really valid and are needed. I think there's quite a wide spectrum of advocacy. And sometime during this fall series, I'll have a few colleagues on who maybe are a bit more on the public and outspoken side of advocacy, which I think is very, very important as well. I think for me, though, what's fundamental to this work is why does government matter? Why does government matter? Because they are the duty bearers for all of our fundamental rights. They touch on all of the day-to-day, living experiences that we have, whether it's taking public transit, looking at municipal government, and the decisions they make around how they fund that or don't fund that, whether it's, infrastructure, publicly, housing. I mean, that's a huge, huge issue right now in Canada. Whether it's, issues like education, healthcare, which are provincially led issues that have all impacted us on a day-to-day basis at some point in our lives, even if we're not currently sick or in school. They still have a huge impact on our society. And also, many of the bigger picture federal issues, such as trade, such as international affairs, and such as overarching issues in terms of Canadian identity and who we are as a country. And for example, how we see ourselves in relationship with the Indigenous peoples who've been here for forever. So I think there's a lot of different issues to reflect on, and I think in order to really be effective and make the kind of change you want to make, and come at it from your it's great to be anchored in your values. It's great to really understand clearly what your values are, and why you want to share those values. But I think as in doing that, it's important to be smart and understand very well who it is you're dealing with on the other side, who it is you're trying to engage with. How can you engage them in conversation to find common ground? And how can you really drive dialogue in these areas? And so we're going to be digging into that a lot more over the next few weeks. So just to shift gears a little bit from my vision of what I think a progressive rights-based government relations looks like. And I think, for me, again, that's really about who is being brought into the conversation, how are decisions being made, and whose best interests. And how do you understand that and try and influence it from within your own values? I think those are kind of the core principles. I'm just going to move on now and talk a little bit more about our work at Jan Clark Consulting. So what do? We've done a number of different things over the last couple of years, all focused on our main goal, which is empowering organizations to work more effectively with government. And, some government relation firms out there, they themselves are lobbyists. They lobby directly on behalf of clients. They have connections. They have, their own kind of political backgrounds. That's not how we work at Jan Clark Consulting. We have a very different approach. We're all about empowering the sector to lead their own work in advocacy and lead their own work with government relations. So how can we offer you the right kind of training and coaching? How can we offer you the tools and resources, develop the toolkit you need or the strategy you need and bring your leadership on board to deliver that strategy? Those are all things we've done over the last few years. One of the things that I've really, really enjoyed doing, and I apologize because again, I have cats fighting in the background of my live. One of the things that I've really enjoyed doing a lot over since launching into this work is helping organizations step back and say, okay, what are we doing that is driving forward our positive reputation with government, that is helping us have credibility and influence with government, and is really helping us make a difference on behalf of the communities that we're serving? Is everything that we're doing as an organization really focused on that? Or at least conscious of that in the way that we're approaching all of our work? I think there's been a tendency sometimes in some organizations to see, marketing and communications and individual fundraising, say, as a completely separate area of work from government relations and government engagement. But I think the idea of building these organizations that have a lot of integrity around the way they talk about their communities, the way they talk to government on behalf of their communities, the way they bring their communities forward to speak to government directly. I think there's a huge amount of promise and value in those kinds of integrated and aligned approaches. So I think that's an area that we really focus on as a firm. So what have we done? I mentioned we've done strategies. We've gone in and done audits for organizations and said, okay, well, what are you doing right now, and what do you need to change in order to be more effective in your work with government, for example? We've also gone in and said, okay, after we've done that, we recognize that there's some gaps in these specific areas. We want to offer you a training workshop for your team that will focus on addressing those gaps, so everyone on the team can be more effective in their work with government. We've also started this year to offer more and more workshops, and we're about to launch another cohort next week, where we have incredible conversations with nonprofit leaders across Canada who want to learn how to influence government on behalf of the communities they serve. And we give them a lot of technical tools and tips and coaching and guidance about how to do that. We also offer ongoing support to some of our retainer clients who call on us whenever they need advice on how to approach government. But we really work from the basis of wanting to empower the sector and wanting the sector to understand that they're the experts. The nonprofit sector are the experts on their issues. They're the experts on their communities, and they're the ones who should be at the forefront of speaking to government. Once they have a good understanding, which many of them do, but how can we improve their understanding of how to connect with government and make it more effective? So that's kind of what we do. We offer courses. Another service that we offer from time to time is we do some of the kind of done for you pieces where someone has a government report that needs to be written. We might step in and offer some support with that on an occasional basis or with a proposal, but it's sort of under a very specific set of circumstances or selected basis. Because really what we're about is wanting to try and empower other organizations to be able to do this work themselves instead of having to rely on consultants all the time to do the work for them. So yeah, I've managed to talk here for 25 minutes almost about the work and why I'm so passionate about it. And I'm looking forward to bringing in, I have 5 or 6 different guests that I've already connected with that I'm going to be bringing in over the next 10 weeks as we do this weekly LinkedIn Live series. And I'll focus in more on some specific topics that we cover as well. Just to walk you through it kind of as I wrap up here, for our course that's launching next week, one of the things that we're going to be covering, 4 main themes in that course. One of which is what is the calendar and the cycle and how are funding decisions made within the federal government, because it's quite complex. There are a lot of different layers. But having a good understanding of that really helps you know when is the right time to approach someone for funding, and when is the right time to apply a little pressure, and how can you make that most effective? So that's one thing we talk about. We also talk about what it's like to actually work in government and how that can drive you to adopt the strategic empathy approach and be really effective in terms of how you engage government and create win-win scenarios. We're also going to spend some time talking about the ever somewhat thorny and somewhat complicated picture, which is what is the nonprofit sector and charitable sector's role in advocacy and policy engagement, and what are the ways you can do that most effectively? What are the ways you can do that, obviously, and stay within the rules? And we've got some great examples and that we're going to be highlighting and discussing, and as well as people from the course sharing their own experiences. And then finally, we spend the last week basically talking about, how to speak government, in the sense that we walk you through program theory, results-based management, some of the ways the government talks about their programs and thinks about their programs, so that you can use that language in your own proposals and your own work with government as well. So that's just a rundown of our course. I hope that you can join us. Feel free to reach out, and next week I'll be having a special guest join me for our LinkedIn Live, and we're going to be talking about the kickoff to the new session of federal parliament, which is starting next Monday, the cabinet shuffle that took place over the summer, and the polls, and what are the implications of all of that for our sector as we head into the fall. So thanks everyone for joining me, and look forward to connecting with you every week. Bye for now.